Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025 at 1:32 in the afternoon. So we're back now to start our conversations on the CHIP program, the S-127. I have Charlie Baker with us this morning. Charlie, thank you. This afternoon, thank you for coming in. We appreciate your willingness to come in and chat with us a little bit about the CHIP program.
Yes, thank you very much. For the record, Charlie Baker, Executive Director of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, and also testifying also on behalf of our state association, VAPTA, Vermont Association of Planning Development Agencies. I did send a letter in last week. Oh, that is posted now, like magic. Thank you. And I want to kind of focus on one particular aspect of the CHIP program, which is really kind of the connection to the RPCs, shockingly. And a couple, call your attention to a couple things and sorry, I'm going to try to get to the right. I'm looking at the S-127 as passed by the Senate. And in one paragraph 13, top of page 27, which is in the definitions of the definition of related costs. And there is language in there about related costs may include direct municipal expenses, such as direct departmental or personnel costs, et cetera, et cetera. We'd like to get regional planning commissions and regional development commissions mentioned there, or sorry, regional development corporations, sorry. There so that we have the ability to step in and help a town if they need help with this process, and then get reimbursed out of the proceeds of it. So anyway, that's just one suggestion for you to consider. As this has been getting talked about, we have been, at least we've been hearing that towns may need some help from one or another of the regional partners there. So that's one suggestion. Up to you if you want me to pause on these, if you want, or I got a couple other ones.
One has questions. I think that's pretty sure.
Excellent. And then as we're talking about the location, and I've been kind of looking at the section of bill, and frankly, this whole housing conversation writ large, of which this is a little piece, right? We're trying to increase our tools in the toolbox. And we're really trying to activate the private sector market. This is not all going to happen. No offense to the affordable housers, my friends there. But and certainly money still needs to be invested in affordable housing. But really, largely, we need to reactivate and redevelop the private sector market to build housing. I do see this as a real tool to do that. And then I think, we're also delaying the receipt of some property taxes, both municipal and education property taxes, to do this, right? And so I think one of the bigger questions, and I don't have an answer here yet, but is there some priority to this? We have some location criteria in this, and process requirements in paragraph C on page 31. We would, in the process requirements, at least like to get one step in the process to be that they get a letter of regional plan conformance from the RPC. And that's really, we just want to kind of prevent issues of this, investments kind of going in wacky places that weren't consistent with the regional plan. And we think in doing that, and in my comment letter, I have some more specific language also in E2, on page 32, paragraph 2 there. It talks about only in tier 2 does it ask for a letter of support from the RPC, and that doesn't quite make sense to us. We'd rather have it be more generic, the front end, and more comprehensive than just in those tier 2 locations. And so, sir, I think we've been kind of looking at this. This does look like it would be a very good tool. And help some projects. And I think we're of the stance of we need all the tools. So please add this one and any more that you can think of. I know, property tax abatement has been talked about at a smaller scale, and obviously we have TIF, at a bigger scale, but this is great to fit in the middle. And, I guess I just will leave, we do have some concerns about whether this could be abused in some ways. And I don't know, maybe that's okay. Like maybe we kind of open this up, see how it goes, and come back next year and say, oh, that was not an outcome we expected, and let's fix it. Totally rational approach. I've recommended things like that in the past in different legislative bodies, local and state. So that's, I guess I just want to kind of just express that concern of like, if this is just supporting McMansions, in a lake town, a lakeside, like I don't think that's really anybody's intent. There's nothing in here that we see that might prevent that, but maybe we'll just have to kind of let it play out and adjust it as we go forward. So sorry, I'm not being more constructive with that thought, but just want to kind of raise that up because I also get concerned about getting too constricted. If we make it too tight, we're going to undermine the broader effort to help with funding mechanisms for infrastructure for housing. So, Mr. Chair, that was most of my thoughts.
I was wondering, I think you brought one of them up, it's building, a huge mansion on taxpayer dime, but what other things do you see that could be used to?
I mean, I think those safeguards in here are really the fact that they have to work through the town, right? Like the town has, so that I think is providing us some comfort, like, okay, that's going to go through some public process and get beat on a bit to make sure that there's some public interest involved here because we are deferring those property taxes. So that's why I was like, I don't want to have anything concrete and don't want to, put too much constraints on it right now, but just raising a note of, caution. We'll see how it plays out. And the other thing I'll say about where we are in the housing market right now is our housing market has been so broken for so long that people should not be shocked that we're not addressing all the needs, that the market isn't addressing all of the needs in the market early on. Our supply is so far away from the demand. It's going to take some years of building supply. And so I know we're going to have higher end housing built early on because that's what pencils out. And it's going to take some years until we have enough labor force built up where we can do high end and workforce level housing.
By building maybe higher end, does that open up housing that can be utilized by, more middle class?
That's right. Yeah, those are move up houses, and I'm sure you're hearing a lot of the same conversations I am, like, what can we do to build worker housing, middle market housing? And that is going to take a while to get there. So yeah, we're going to start with building what pencils out. And I say the market. And so anyway, so I don't know if this is constructive or not, but, providing some thoughts as we've been kicking this around a little bit. And we would just like to make sure, as we're spending all this time on our regional plans and these future land use maps, that we do what we can to line this up. So that's really our main ask there.
So the regional, I like the idea of the regional, of getting a letter from you. I think it's a good safeguard,
right,
to make sure it aligns the town plan. One thing about the CHIP program is there's no lower limit. So someone could, in theory, build a duplex and use this program. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about. I mean, it seems like for little projects like that, I don't know how much, we may not have very many. Is that going to be an administrative burden on you, or there should be like a lower limit or something like that?
I mean, there's nothing in here that causes a burden on us at the outset. I think we are cognizant of the capacity of our smaller towns. And this is statewide, not Chittenden County.
Right.
We also have small towns in Chittenden County.
Sure. A few.
Yeah. And so, but that's kind of what we're there for, to help those small towns. So we're not concerned about the administrative burden. I think at our level, I think for a small town, like if somebody's coming with a duplex and like, can you help me pay the $50,000 for the septic system? Like, that's legitimate debate for the town to have, right? The select board's got to sign off on that, about whether that's what they want to do. And I have no idea how those conversations will go.
Yeah, I don't think any of us do.
Yeah. But let's, if that's what somebody needs, let's have the conversation and see if the town wants to help them. Good, how you doing?
So when you were talking about the tie-in to the regional plan and plans, I was curious, was that a sort of general thought that you had for any infrastructure project or just certain location?
No, more generally for any of the infrastructure, and it's pretty typical for state grant programs and things to have that kind of letter in as we're making place-based investments.
So that would be for tier 1A and 1B as well?
Yeah, it would just be a generic, because sometimes case of a duplex, we might be like, no, that's fine in a rural area, right? Like that's so it's not to say that things wouldn't get supported or whatever. It's just let's just have that looked, and so we try to keep things as consistent and lined up as we can.
And I would just point out that, as someone on a regional planning commission, there's a real big effort these days to make sure those plans are in sync.
Yeah.
And I think the whole Act 181 really changed the dynamic a little bit there. You see that in terms of maybe not more authority, but more.
Something more.
The idea of the regional plan is really kind of paramount at this point. And I'm just wondering how much well, that's fine. It's not, it just seems to be a different dynamic that's going to naturally make for compatibility between the town plan and the regional. Anyway.
Yeah, and sorry, you opened up a 181 door, so I'll walk through it. But the big thing with 181 was really around Act 250. Act 250 predated all the planning work that has happened in Vermont. And so we had a permitting system and from a regulator myself that wasn't really connected to the planning work. And so to me, that's what we kind of put back together so that Act 250 is supporting the planning work and not undermining it, which in some ways was happening, just because it was only focused on the number of units, not the location. So sorry, that was my little Act 181 jag.
We could talk about that.
Yeah.
Thanks for.
Thank you.
So, and seeing where the suggestion is to have the RPCs sort of weigh in that process, the recent requirements of regional plans be disaggregating county level data to municipal scale. Do you have a sense that the RPCs are in a position to speak to that throughout the state, that all the regional plans are now in a position to be able to have an insight, or that the documents themselves are articulating something really relevant to what CHIP is doing?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Like, yeah, as we're looking at a CHIP proposal, we could be saying, oh, that's really making, whatever significant contribution to that town's housing target, right? Because that's what we're charged with doing right now, is disaggregating those regional housing targets to the towns. So
And so one of the thoughts is the language within the bill, within the way the plans are unfolding now, adequately or robust enough around the concept of permanent housing, that these are being constructed for people to live in year round and not other reasons for which someone might build a house. Do you feel like that safeguard is in there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's, definitely I don't know how explicit it is, but that's definitely my sense of the temperament, is that we're not trying to meet those housing targets through seasonal housing. We're trying to get to permanent housing for Vermont residents and workers. So, and I think when we talk about a letter for regional plan conformance, it would be place and housing numbers. Thank you for bringing that up.
So this actually brings me to my question. So you're talking about the regional plans, and I know in a couple of the towns I represent, they haven't updated their town plans in quite some time. So how is that work conforming with the regional planning process?
Yeah, not all towns even have town plans in Vermont. And so we're, I think, working with those towns to just support them in whatever way we can, but not be overly reliant on the town having to do extra work that maybe they don't have the capacity for or the desire to do.
So when it comes to disaggregating these county numbers into these towns, how does that work?
Well, you'd have to ask your own RPC to get a really specific answer. I can tell you how it's worked in our region so far, and we actually have draft numbers out there for every town right now. For our smaller rural towns, we ended up being pretty close to what they have historically been doing the last 20 or 25 years. So we've been trying to be sensitive to the capacity issues, and then we have towns that have sewer capacity, like they can take on more. So those conversations are happening individually in each RPC with their towns about how they're breaking it down.
But there's not a requirement for each town to have like a plan in order to get this disaggregation
No.
happening.
No, and I think from my conversations with my peers, I have the sense that they're really trying to be sensitive to the circumstances in that town. So if it's a very rural, small town that has only done a handful of housing units a year, we're not trying to say, oh, you should be doing 100 a year. Like it's not really reasonable. And so we're trying to be very reasonable, I think, with the towns as we're talking to them that it's a stretch goal probably for everybody, for every town, but that real small town has a lot less to do than a medium-sized town has a lot less to do than a bigger town.
I'm just, for my curiosity, I know, having worked in regional planning for Chittenden County,
Yep.
you require us to update our town plans like every 8 years, right?
We don't, we're just here to help you.
Okay.
Tony. It's really the state is really the bad cop there.
I'm both, so.
No, and I'm sorry to joke. It's in statute.
Okay,
It's in statute. Town and regional plans have an 8-year cycle. RPCs are required to do regional plans.
Mhm.
For the towns, it's an option. So we weren't ever saying you have to, but
okay,
if you want to keep your plan updated, we probably did use have to, like, that you need to get it done by this date. And particularly for larger towns that had impact fees and other things, that was one of the statutory requirements to provide or to have that kind of program. So there might be some reasons that you do want to keep your town plan in place, like impact fees is the one that's coming to mind. It also, I think, was adding some points and things in different grant programs. So there's other reasons to do that.
Yeah, you have to have a town plan in order to get a CDBG grant.
Right.
There's different things that you need to plan for. This committee changed the, the timeframe. We'll make it a little longer for municipalities to have to redo their plan again.
That's right. It used to be 5 years.
Yeah.
And I think
when that changed.
Yeah, and I think we were probably in here at the time saying like it would be helpful to give towns and regions more time to work on implementing. Because a 5-year cycle was almost like you were done, take a year off.
Yeah.
And then it seemed like, yeah,
So I just said that's another way we could put in some guardrails and some of this stuff too. Because it sounds like sometimes, it sounds like your towns, they are not required to have a town plan.
Yeah, some of them they're updated, some of them aren't. But like I say, it's a patchwork of
Right.
who's got them and who doesn't.
Perhaps some standardization that we can come up with.
So back to what should the guardrails be? This bill is funding not infrastructure, but improvements, which include a lot, not just. And so I'm wondering is when you look at that list and it's on page 26, starting at line 6, I'm not a builder, we'll start there. Is that right? In digital including utilities, digital infrastructure, transportation, public recreation, parking, public facilities, and amenities, land and property acquisition and demolition, brownfield remediation, site preparation, and flood remediation and mitigation. So that's a pretty big list. It doesn't fund housing. This is what
Right,
this
right.
program funds, these things. I'm truly wondering if that's the right list of things that it should be. And again, not a builder, when I look at this, I say, gosh, I could cut 3 of these things out without even batting an eyelash and think it would still do its job in investing in housing across the state and cut some loopholes out so that we're not spending education funding on things that might be a public good, but aren't going to really encourage housing. So I'm looking for feedback from
Yeah.
people in the building community to help me understand where we're being too broad and where we need to make sure we don't cut any of these things.
And I'm not a builder either.
But you're a planner and you're way.
But familiar with these issues. And I guess at this point in time, I guess I appreciated that it was a broader list. Well, I won't pick out any of these yet. And so just because the situations can be so different town to town or, situation to situation, like the flood remediation, yeah, that can be a real issue in some places. Other places, not an issue. They got something else, they need a sewer upgrade. So
Build a playground in a mansion and take out money from the education fund for a playground to build next to my mansion.
yeah, and that's in my
It has
mind.
Hours from noon to 7 for people to use. I mean, look, that's possible in the way the bill is written.
Yeah,
I just drove a big bus through it.
yeah, and
why
that's
I'm looking for feedback from people in the community who will be honest with us and help us close those loopholes so that it's done in a very targeted and clear way.
yeah. The safeguard in here to me was the fact that the municipality has to be a partner in this, and they have to have that public discussion at their select board to say, like, do we want to give a tax break? Because the municipalities losing out on tax dollars too, right? And I mean, 100% of their proper municipal property tax dollars, I think, or at least up to. So they have to be a partner in this, thinking that it makes sense to do what the developer is proposing if it's a developer project as opposed to a town project. So I'm a little encouraged and not as worried about that because of that public process that it's got to go through, for better or worse. And truly, I mean, this is, and better than I do. I mean, public policy, it's hard to foresee every situation. And so I've always been very much of the mind of like, this is, if something's worth doing, let's try it, but realize there's no way we got it perfect the first time. So, I plan on, sorry, I know the chair's been through this lots of years, it's going to come back and you'll probably want to amend it after you learn some things, but, yeah. Well, and it was the public recreation one was the one I kind of like raised an eyebrow at first. I was like, well, maybe there's some situation where a town is, has had a plan for a park in their town for a lot of years. It's on their official map, and that developer site happens to, maybe part of the park is on that property or something, and it is a way to finance that. It's like, maybe that circumstance could come up. So at the moment, I'm feeling like, okay, to be more open and broad, and trust the process.
On the whole municipal participation thing, so I represent at least one town, and I know there are plenty of surrounding towns in my area that have a lot of second home ownership. And so is there the thing that keeps coming to mind is actually on the voting, because a lot of second home owners are not going to necessarily be there to vote. So is there any concern about
My understanding of the voting, and maybe I didn't pay enough, is
We're just like
the-
municipal participation and stuff.
Yeah.
Typically.
Yeah, and they will definitely-
Very engaged second homeowners, but we do have, a certain proportion that, may not be fully engaged on the town's goings on.
Right. Yeah, and my understanding of this was that it was really going to be up to the legislative body, which is almost always year-round residents, as far as I know. But yeah, right. It's hard to do business when they're not there, right? So that's what I was taking some comfort in.
Okay.
Yeah, going back to maybe the concept of loopholes and, one person's loophole might be another person's, kind of essential. I'm thinking of a town and the development they're looking at is maybe, 6 to 8 double wides, off in a field, not within the town village or anything. And they might need it. Like they might want a playground in order to make it attractive for folks to come. What you thought about that?
I mean, again, back to the select board. If the select board is like, yeah, that seems like a good deal, and they sign off on it.
Of course, it's the McMansion issue, which I do think the difference.
Yeah, and second homes, right? I mean, could be second homes, I guess, but again, would the select board sign off on that? I don't know, maybe maybe there's some pressure that's going to happen there. We're going to learn some things after a few select boards go through this.
So, I mean, I think the two sort of concerns that we've talked about are about affordability and about the sort of idea of year-round primary residence.
Yep.
And from a planning perspective and the way the town plans work, I mean, do you see sort of guardrails, or do you have any suggestions for how to, whether or not this legislation should have any kind of requirements around?
That is a really good question. And, kind of, I guess I was thinking about those things where I was talking about the market and how broken we are. That is something to definitely think about. You should think about options of like, does a percent of the project that is using this financing tool have to be, at least like up to 120, affordable up to 120% of median income? Like that like 80 to 120% is, sorry if I'm using, I know this is the Economic Development Committee, not the Housing Committee. But so if we think about less than 80% is affordable housing, so affordable to 80% of the median income, and some you get really low. And yeah, Chris and others can talk more about this in much more detail. And then more workforce housing is 80 to 120. So the average homeowner can afford that. I was trying to think, and I couldn't come up with an easy answer of like, oh, is there a percentage? We do this for priority housing projects right now. Like they have an incentive in the regulatory world of being able to avoid Act 250 review if they do. And I can't remember if that's 15 or 20% affordable. That is something you could think about in the realm of options. But we didn't, as I was talking about with some of my peers, we didn't close in on a real great solution there. But it is, I think, a legitimate concern about what to do here. And then on the other side of the coin, I will also say that the but-for option really has never made any sense to me. Like, I don't think any of these projects, like they wouldn't be coming to their town asking for financing help if the project worked on its own, right? So the fact that somebody's even going through the pain of going, right? And if you think about being a developer going through public meetings at your select board and showing your finances and why you need this financing help, that's not no small thing that the property owner developer is doing. So anyway, sorry, that was on the other side of the coin.
Crazy thoughts. As we talk about the McMansion concerns, also the percentage of housing of the coverage with it, meaning, 50% has to be housing or what have you. Instead of saying you can't do that, would it be working it into the formula that you don't retain as much of the increment if it's not as, fluffy as everybody wants? Because I mean, if there's an opportunity to have a McMansion, which brings additional money to the municipality once it's fully taxed. I would hate to say no to that project, but maybe the answer to that would be to, well, listen, if you're going to do it for this really rich, whatever, one those people, if they move into Vermont, that means they're paying taxes in Vermont, which is also really good. But you just lower the increment on it and might, make it taste a little bit better to somebody. Did that make any sense? Am I making any sense now? I don't make sense usually.
No, I think there's things like that to think about, right? You got 100% of the municipal and you got, is it 70%? 80% of the education? Yeah. Could you play around with those percentages for different types of projects?
And this way, if it is a project that, only has 30%, housing, it's still a benefit to the community having that property there from a municipality standpoint. Because it's adding to the tax rolls. And if the concern is that it's going to be abused, then just lower the increment on that one. I don't know how to write it. I'm just throwing it out there.
Thing when we start shifting, utilizing different
Yeah.
percentages, then we're creating more administrative burdens for somebody. Not only that somebody is, but we're trying right now to write something that doesn't create a huge administrative burden. If they try to get it off the ground, and I think through data that we get going down the road, if it makes sense to do something like that, then that would be something that we should entertain, but let's try to, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea, I think it's a good idea, but I think we need more data to understand it better. Charlie, what do you think of, right now, there's no percentage of how much housing has to be built in a project. So theoretically, it could be one house gets built and the rest of it could be commercial. And so we've heard from some that we shouldn't have any percentages. Leave it as broad as possible, but your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that was, without making it more bureaucratic and going through more hoops, I kind of understood why it's in that place right now, and that made some sense of like, it's too hard to know what every project might look like. And again, I'm maybe putting too much faith in that select board conversation, like, hey, we're only getting one housing unit. Like, this is not worth us doing this.
It could be,
They can
huge
keep their,
commercial
yeah,
endeavor, right? And wanting to utilize
and they,
chip. And the reason why we're entertaining this is we need more housing, we want more housing, we want as much housing built as possible.
right. Yeah, and that's what I'm like, but does the town want to use this financing tool to help get one unit,
Yeah, but if they're still able to get
the property tax from the commercial or,
grand list to come up,
yeah, but
so whatever way is possible, then we'll use it, right?
yeah, but isn't this tool kind of saying that we're going to forego the municipal property taxes or the increment of the municipal property taxes for some time frame? So if they're willing to do that and make that trade.
But I think the question for us is, do we utilize Ed fund money that we're going to provide in order to get housing, that we get housing? So I think that's something that we have to think about. And then if we do, then how do we create something that can then that would be able to look at each project, say, well, you don't meet 60% or 50% or 40%, but because this could be something that really does help the community in getting more housing, or helps the area, the county, whatever, helps the a huge foyer in the area. And it's worth doing.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's could very well be the conversation that happens locally. So, yeah, again, I don't know, I have to put on my free market hat today, but kind of like we're gonna let the market work a little bit here because it's so broken. It's gonna be a while before it gets normalized. So thank you for working on this.
Joe, thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Maura, good afternoon.
Hello there. I've been listening in secretly behind the screen on the wall.
Behind
Nice
the
job,
clothes.
Charlie. Shall I
Thanks
jump
for-
in?
Yes, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it. And I think, we're talking CHIP and I think we want to know what your thoughts are. And I think you heard some of the questions that were asked, and maybe you can weigh in on some of those as well.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm Maura Collins. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I'm happy to be here to speak in favor of, frankly, all of S127, but the CHIP proposal specifically. I've been in this committee several times this year and decided to not repeat myself because I know how smart you are and that you don't need to be reminded of the housing shortage that we're facing. But as you know, with needing 30,000 homes in the next 4 years, we used to be able to say 5, but tick-tock, we're moving quickly toward 2030, and we do need thousands of homes. And we've talked about how one of the things that's driving up the cost of housing is the fact that housing now bears the cost of housing now is picking up the cost of infrastructure investments. And while infrastructure investments used to be socialized across hundreds or thousands of community members, and municipalities had the capacity to put in roads and sewer and water and lights and paths, and they would frankly hope and pray and wish that developers would be so lucky to come in and plop a subdivision in, and the municipality really welcomed that because it meant more kids in their school district, more workers for their factories and jobs, more vibrancy of their downtown. But at some point, municipal budgets, and I'm going to slightly blame healthcare, but municipal budgets got more constrained, and it really shifted. And infrastructure expenses became the responsibility of the housing developer, and the developer only could control the 10, 20, maybe 30 homes that she or he were building. And so those costs got socialized over a far smaller group of people, the people buying or renting those homes. And therefore, the cost of housing shot up considerably. And the costs are getting more expensive. Everything in the world is, but it really goes to show that when we can socialize costs over a bigger spectrum of folks, then it makes things more affordable. And so I know you've heard testimony like this before, but I can't be here without just saying that if you are adding housing to a community, you are ultimately going to support the education fund. A stronger economy is going to add to the ed fund. An adequate workforce is going to add to the ed fund. Your dilemma, and the one I've listened to for years, is how much housing is going to tip the scales so that the ed fund ends up ahead of the curve versus behind. And I know that's what you're really grappling with today. I'm hearing the phrase guardrails. I'm hearing you all talk about what kinds of parameters you want to consider to put on this proposal so that you can protect the ed fund and make sure that the housing that you are envisioning, that you know the state needs most, which is primary residences for our workforce and our residents, that you want to make sure that if you're going to put some ed fund dollars at risk, that you know that the type of housing that gets created is the type that you're envisioning. And there are examples where the state has really encouraged and incentivized primary residences and affordable housing specifically. I'm thinking of, if you think back a couple years ago, before we had a lot of talk about Act 250, there were priority housing projects, PHPs, and this was a way that affordable housing could be exempt from Act 250. And there actually was a summer study committee that the Department of Housing and Community Development led, that VHFA and others were a part of. And that report has recommendations of how the state can support affordable housing and putting in some new incentives to encourage municipalities to make affordable housing development faster, cheaper, and better. And so there are recommendations that I know that some of the housing committees are looking at and probably need more discussion in the legislature to make sure that we are protecting affordable housing. But at the end of the day, if you're building affordable housing, you need money to make it affordable. And in fact, this committee, last time I was in here and we were talking about VITA's statute, you heard me talking about the difference between lending dollars for housing, which is easy to do, versus lending subsidized dollars to housing, which is harder because anytime you have a subsidy, it costs money. That subsidy has to come from somewhere. And so I want to make sure that the committee is clear-eyed about if you are trying to use this CHIP proposal to create affordable housing, then at some point you will need more than this. You would need some kind of subsidy to do that. But I will say that the Priority Housing Project model is one that does exist in statute as a reminder, because I'm certain I even had to look it up exactly how you define priority housing projects. So I'll remind all of you that priority housing projects are mixed income developments. And Charlie was speaking a little bit about what the right income levels are. And often we aim for different targeted income levels, whether we're talking about rental housing or home ownership, homes that are owned. And so for rental housing, priority housing projects, we made sure that 20% of the apartments that were created were affordable to households under 80% of median. And that's usually, as Charlie said, kind of a standard we see that rentals will be under 80% of median. For owned homes, the prices had to be, the homes had to be sold at prices that were affordable to people at 120% of median. And so again, it's just 20% of the owned homes that were being built under a priority housing project designation had to be under 120% median, and 20% of the rental units had to be. The rental units did have a secondary clause though, and it said also that those rentals had to be affordable like that for 15 years. Now, it was the NRB that used to certify developments as affordable. And when they got money from VHFA or VHCB, it was easy. Those rental buildings, we knew that they were probably perpetually affordable, and we knew that they were under these income limits. So that was kind of, I could see how the NRB could easily say, this is a priority housing project because it has government money that requires it to be affordable for at least 30 years, if not longer. When the NRB was certifying that for sale developments were priority housing projects, I was always curious about how they knew the kinds of questions that you all are asking. Like, how do you know? First off, you don't really know the incomes of the people buying these homes. You only know that they are priced to be affordable to people at those incomes. You don't really know if someone has a very high income and just is buying an inexpensive home. You don't know if that home was going to be converted to a rental in the future. You don't know if that home was going to be converted to a vacation home in the future. On the rental side, if there wasn't government money requiring it to be affordable for a long time, you didn't know. I don't know who was ever checking to see if that was affordable 15 years from now, or if that rental apartment was sold to be homeownership in the future. Or the same thing about incomes. Maybe that apartment was just rented at a low price point, but someone's income was actually much higher. And so I've cautioned other committees about making sure that if you put affordability restrictions on this program, that you really make sure that that is accompanied by the kind of staffing and monitoring that makes sure that what you're requiring is not performative, and that we know that this housing really is meeting the intention that you're writing in. So one thing that I encouraged the Senate to include, and it's in the bill now, that I think I want to shine a light on it because I do think it may address some of the questions you all are asking, is that starting on page 39, it talks about information reporting and what both VEPC and the Department of Taxes has to report to the legislature, because sometimes I'm a little worried that right now we may be so scared about, sounds like McMansions, but the unintended consequences of some of the housing that's going to be created and supported under this program, and that we may work so hard to put so many guardrails and protections that may be somewhat impossible to really get our arms around, that instead it may be adequate that every year you all look at the housing that's been created through this program and then adjust accordingly. So instead of trying to envision everything that may happen in the next 5-10 years and the different negative outcomes, I think it's great that every year the legislature is going to have to receive reports that talk about what projects were approved and when, a description of them, what the original taxable value versus the revenue they've generated, but also about the scope of the improvements, about the developments and the number of homes. And it has in there an evaluation requirement that VEPC is going to evaluate the success of this program using the intention that the legislature has in this bill about what it's trying to do in terms of trying to serve primary residences and modest income homes. And so I think that those are excellent components. And like all good legislation, you may have to come back and tweak this in the future as you look and you see that something none of us ever imagined happened. You may need to then pull that back. But I do caution about overly laying on too many overlays that make this a tool that makes it unworkable. Because I do think this is going to be a powerful tool that is going to help some housing get across the finish line, especially housing that may not be government subsidized and may just need this kind of tax abatement process to pencil. And it will serve the affordable housing that we know and love and administer. They also will benefit from this, and it'll further reduce the rents that the housing that we support will have to charge because of this benefit of the infrastructure being paid for through the CHIP program. So I'm happy to answer questions from anyone.
Thanks, Maura. Well, one of the things sometimes I forget about in this bill is the Infrastructure Sustainability Fund, because we spend a lot of time with the CHIP elements. I'm just curious, do you see the municipalities being able to utilize both, or is there a way in which they can leverage one and the other at the same time? Do you see them as will that also be overlooked because of the chip discussion? Will something somehow sort of dominate, and the infrastructure sustainability fund might get less uptake because of the interest in chip?
I have not had that fear. I also don't think I'm the right person to answer that question. I have to be honest that, the question of, I'm not a developer, so I don't know which of the tools I'd be aiming for, and I'm not a municipality to know which I would find easier or harder to administer, but I definitely think that hearing from both would probably answer that question. I'm excited about both tools, though. I'm an absolute overuser of the tool in the toolbox cliche, and I just want to fill the toolbox with as many things as possible, because I know that sometimes we have built brilliant programs at VHFA and it still doesn't serve all the needs. So I always like having more things to pull from, but whether these would be in competition with each other, I don't think I'm the best person to know the answer to that.
Thanks.
So I would completely agree with you about the guardrail issue. We've already got guardrails in it just by the mere fact that Pepsi has to approve it. And it's not like there's going to be all these different organizations coming to municipalities and making a bunch of this happening all at once. And then you have to have the community vote. So any real big impact or concern isn't for at least 1 year out, for the most part. And then we can pivot then, because we'll be in office at that point. But if the concern is the education fund, do you see an impact if we were to make it so that the original taxable value did go up with the general assessment in the area? Because one of the things with TIF is that it assesses it takes a piece of property. If it's worth $1,000 at that moment, it's worth $1,000 for the next 10, 15, 20 years. But we do know that it does go up. It does go up. I mean, property values always go up at a certain percentage in the municipality. It's, do you think that would have a marketable negative impact to add that type of guardrail in? And not making any sense, but it's in the 420 bill that I have, which it allows the actual property value to go up 3% annually, depending on the local assessment, whether or not that's going up. And that would make it so that when you add that in there and the increment on top of that, the ed fund never goes backwards.
I'm sorry to give you the same answer 2 questions in a row, but I'm intrigued by that idea, but I haven't read it, so I'm nervous to weigh in, but I hear what you're saying and what your intention is. I don't have an opinion on if that's the better approach than holding it steady or not.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. You were talking about these guardrails and affordability percentages with reference to a program, and I didn't catch the name of it. And you were talking about, I was thinking particularly the ownership, and I think it was 120% of something, but I didn't quite catch what the program was, and 120% of what.
Yep. So for the priority housing projects that were exempt from Act 250, before lots of housing was exempt from Act 250, but priority housing projects were the primary way that housing developments used to be exempt from Act 250. And what it did was, for homeownership, it said that the sales price had to be affordable to a household earning 120% of the area median income for that region. And so how it worked in practicality was that VHFA published a chart, and we still do, I could send a link around, that has, for regions of the state, it says, what are the price points for a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3, 4-bedroom home that would be affordable to someone earning 120% of the median income. And we did the same thing and had in the same chart, it says what the rents would be for a 1, 2, 3, 4-bedroom apartment. But that is set to 80% of median income, knowing that we want housing to be more affordable for renters than for owners. So it wasn't for a specific program. It was to qualify for this priority housing project. And in both cases, owned and rental, it only had to be that 20% of the homes created had to be affordable at those price points. The other 80% could be whatever they were.
Yeah, so I'd be interested in seeing the Vermont table that you referred to. I guess it's somebody's table that had showed the areas and the median incomes and the value of the house, I guess.
Yep. I'd be happy to share that with Anna Grace, and that can get circulated.
Okay. And let me put something else out there. Originally, this started out as a TIF type program that would be used to finance not just housing infrastructure, but housing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thought there was that there may be locations in the state where the growth is really so poor that they need maybe an extra jolt. Wondering what you think about, and it's changed, and there might be a lot of reasons for it changing and now being more narrow. Do you have any thoughts about a program like this being used for housing itself?
Meaning to make the housing more affordable? Is that what you mean, housing itself?
Yeah, exactly. In other words, I think the original bill, I saw something where eligible projects included both infrastructure as well as housing construction.
Yep. I would love to look into that more. I think that's an excellent idea. I think we do need more tools to make housing more affordable. I think I mentioned a summer study committee at what could replace priority housing projects. And of those recommendations, one of the biggest ones was funding for housing. And so that would meet that need. As someone who administers housing programs, though, I would have a lot of questions about, well, what kind of housing are we talking about here and what would be the eligible use? I want to make sure that that doesn't just, pad profits, but that it really is reducing the housing costs in the way I hear you intend. But I think that studying that going forward would be an excellent idea. I would be hesitant on April 22nd to add such a thing at this late moment, but I think that exploring that for future consideration would be really beneficial to see if it's possible.
Yeah, thank you.
If it's helpful to you, I did pull up that affordability chart. I'm happy to show it to you all. It will overwhelm you, or I can just send the link through. It's up to you.
I'm probably going to need more than a few minutes to look at it. So
It's a lot of numbers. Yeah.
A question? Edie?
So Maura, thank you. I really appreciate the reporting section. That's one that I've been noodling on and trying to make sure that it's comprehensive and will give us the information that we really need to make sure that the program is doing what we need it to do. So I think it's maybe a couple of tweaks, but it's pretty comprehensive as it stands. So appreciate that. Thank you. Back to the question that I asked earlier when I think you were listening. Are there areas in the infrastructure piece that you can look at and say, that might be a stretch, that might be putting us at risk? I understand we have municipalities who are actually making decisions here, and we're trying to be broad to include as many housing developments across the state. But again, as it stands, we don't have a housing requirement, just that a house is built. And so I really want to make sure that we have appropriate guardrails, and I'm going to use that word again, to make sure that our state dollars are being used appropriately and
Yeah. I know is I believe that, there's been talk about having it be 60% of the homes or primary residences. Is that in the bill or has that just been discussed in committee? I'm sorry, I'm not.
I think it has been in the bill at one point. It is not currently in the bill now.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the reasons I'm excited about this program is that it is a housing program. And, you know, I'm a houser, so it's not going to surprise any of you to hear that, like, I want all the benefits of this to go to housing and primary residences specifically. So, anything and everything you can do to have your guardrails be supporting housing creation is going to be paramount of my priority list. So, you know, I understand why there are developments, and especially with the kind of downtown developments we want to encourage, we do need there to be some space for commercial, because a good downtown building often is going to have that first floor retail or commercial space. And so that makes sense to me, but I'm going to want you to hold firm that making sure that the majority of benefit from the infrastructure is housing. I also really want it to be primary residences, knowing that 17% of our housing stock are not primary residences. And I get more nervous for you about how you're going to do that, because once a property is in the marketplace, unless you have a deed restriction, I don't know of a way that you can limit the conversion from a primary residence to a rental, or, I mean, rental can be primary, but that's not rented out for secondary use. I mean, I'm a mortgage lender, and we see this sadly with some regularity, that VHFA loans, which can only be used for primary residences, sometimes we find out that, you know, the person has moved to Florida and they're renting it out, and it's someone's primary residence, but it's not the mortgage holders. And then, you know, we have to step in and take some action. So I want to be honest that, you know, uses do change, and a for sale home especially can switch from a primary residence to a vacation home without any of our knowledge. And so what I would say is that we do have a lot of fear about that, and that fear is well grounded, because that does happen. I can also tell you that in 20 years at VHFA, it's not 5% of our mortgages that end up, you know, with people moving out of state and renting out their homes. It's such a small percentage of the time that that worst case scenario happens. Now, you can't equate our mortgage experience with this program, but I'm just saying that there is always going to be some tolerance for bad actors taking advantage of programs, and we can't design all of our programs with that worst case scenario in mind. And so instead, we also have to, in some ways, trust the market that most of the homes that are going to be built, there is just such high demand for housing that, you know, I do think that a lot of these properties, especially with the VEPC oversight and approval process and the eyes from a municipality on this development, that is a lot more oversight than the average independent home builder building a one-off home for someone who's going to turn it into a ski condo is ever going to get. And so I think that there is some naturally built-in sunlight and eyes on these projects because of the municipal involvement and because of VEPC's involvement that will help to mitigate some of those fears.
Okay, so I guess I'm gonna kind of take what you said now and what you said before about the reporting, and I'm wondering maybe if we put some of this into the reporting. So percentage of units that are, you know, up to 120% AMI, their percent of units that are being sold as primary residences. I don't know, something along those lines. Maybe we can track it better that way, because without the data, we don't know that we have a problem or not. But, and I don't know who's going to be able to have that information, because again, we're providing money for the improvements.
Mm-hmm.
for the infrastructure. And so I struggle with that, right? I struggle with we want information on the housing, but we're not funding the housing. We're funding the basis for the housing. And so I'm. Yeah,
But you
so
are
that's-
asking
and I go-
about the number of homes already. So to ask
Correct.
for number of homes and expected sales price and expected rent levels.
Seems reasonable.
It does to me. I mean, I hear what you're getting at. You can do the math to figure out the percentage of AMI and all that. I think the question is just what's the expected sales price and what's the expected rents charged in that first year, and know that that's for that snapshot in time for that year. You can then look to calculate, you know, where that fell compared to the market overall.
Yeah, someone else is already doing the math. We can plug and play. Yeah, I get that. And then back to the improvements, you're looking at that list. Is there anything in there that you look at and say, that's not really something that is going to get us more housing necessarily? Or is there a way to look at that list and say, you know, if it has this, it has to also have that, or some other way to combine those? And you can think on it. I know this is.
Yeah, I may need to. I mean, I've looked at this before and I listened in on the Senate Finance testimony on it, and they made some tweaks to it that I know I was in support of. So, you know, are there other things that may not be included here? I could give some thought, but I don't have any criticisms of the things that I'm seeing here as, you know, being worthy and eligible.
Thank you.
I did kind of like that idea, though, that maybe like making housing more affordable in general, you know, but that's not infrastructure. So
Questions? Great. Maura, thank you. We will stay in touch, and if there are things that you see or hear that we're talking about that you want to weigh in on, just give us a holler.
I think
I'm
we
more
all
than
know
happy
I'm
to
not
hear.
shy.
And
Thank
We
you so
know
much for
that.
having me.
thank you. Treasurer's. Is he coming to be in person? He's on Zoom, but he's not in yet. Okay, so let's go off live, take a few minutes off and come back so we're here from 2:45 for the treasurer.